Long before European kingdoms rose to prominence, a crippled boy lay in the dust of West Africa, unable to walk, mocked by his entire village, told he would never amount to anything. That boy would grow up to forge the greatest empire Africa had ever seen. His name was Sundiata Keita. And his story is the story of a lion. Sundiata Keita founded the Mali Empire in the 13th century, a realm that would eventually stretch across West Africa, controlling the gold trade, the salt trade, and the trans-Saharan routes that connected Africa to the rest of the medieval world. His empire would produce Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived. His dynasty would rule for centuries. His name would become legend. This is the story of a boy who crawled while others walked, who was driven into exile by those who should have protected him, who faced a sorcerer king that no one could defeat, and who rose anyway. Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Africa. And the proof that greatness has nothing to do with how you start and everything to do with refusing to stay down. Sundiata was born around 1217 in the small kingdom of Kangaba, in what is now Mali. His father was King Magan Khan Fata, a ruler of the Keita dynasty. His mother was Sogolon, a woman described in the oral traditions as the Buffalo Woman, a figure of legend, marked by destiny, bearing a child who would shake the world. According to the epic of Sundiata, passed down by griots for centuries, a hunter-diviner came to the king with a prophecy. He foretold that Sogolon would bear a son who would become the greatest king Mali had ever known. But the path would not be easy. The boy would face trials that would break ordinary men. Only if he survived them would the prophecy be fulfilled. When Sundiata was born, the prophecy seemed impossible. The child's legs were weak, his body frail. He could not crawl like other infants. As he grew, it became clear that something was wrong. The prince who was supposed to be a lion could not even stand. The court watched. The other wives of the king watched. And they began to smile. By the time Sundiata was 5, he still could not walk. He crawled where others walked, dragged himself through the dust of the royal court, watched other children run and play while he could only watch. The boy who was supposed to be a lion was called instead the son of the Buffalo Woman, a mocking nickname that followed him everywhere. The other wives of King Magan, particularly his first wife Sassouma Barit, saw their opportunity. They mocked Sogolon mercilessly. They laughed at Sundiata openly. They whispered to the king that this child could never rule, that the prophecy was clearly false, that another son should be named heir. The king, aging and weary, began to listen. But Sundiata did not break. He watched. He learned. He listened to the griots who came to court, memorizing the stories of great warriors and kings. He asked questions about the world beyond the village. He studied the warriors who trained in the distance, noting how they moved, how they fought, how they held themselves. His legs would not carry him, but his mind was already running. When Sundiata was approximately 7 years old, his father King Magan died. The death was a catastrophe. Magan had named Sundiata as his heir, despite the boy's disability, believing in the prophecy. But a dead king's word means little when the living have other plans. Sassouma Barit moved quickly. She had her own son, Dankaran Two-Man, proclaimed king. The courtiers, ever adaptable, shifted their loyalty to the new regime. Sogolon and Sundiata became non-persons, ignored at best, tormented at worst. The boy who was supposed to be king now had no protection, no status, no future. The persecution grew worse. Sassouma's taunts became threats. Sogolon feared for her son's life. Finally, she made the painful decision to leave, to take Sundiata into exile, to wander from kingdom to kingdom, seeking shelter among strangers. The crippled prince and his mother walked away from everything they had known, with nothing but each other and the hope that somewhere, somehow, the prophecy might still come true. The exile lasted years. Sogolon and Sundiata wandered from kingdom to kingdom, begging for shelter, for food, for safety. They stayed for months in some places, days in others, always moving when welcome wore thin. Sundiata grew older, taller, stronger in his upper body, but his legs still would not carry him. In exile, Sundiata learned. He studied the warriors of every kingdom they visited. He learned their techniques, their strengths, their weaknesses. He trained his upper body until he could drag himself faster than many could walk. He practiced with weapons from a seated position, developing strength and skill that would later amaze those who saw him rise. Through it all, Sogolon never gave up. She protected her son with ferocity, found food when there was none, kept hope alive when hope seemed madness. She reminded him of the prophecy, of the hunter's words, of the destiny that waited if only he would survive to claim it. She was the only person who believed, and her belief was enough. Then one day, when Sundiata was approximately 17 years old, something inside him broke free. According to the epic, he demanded an iron rod be brought to him, a heavy, forged staff used by blacksmiths. He gripped it with both hands. His arms shook. His legs trembled. And then, slowly, impossibly, he began to rise. The boy who was told he would never walk straightened to his full height. His legs, weak for 17 years, somehow held. He took a step. Then another. The iron rod bent in his hands from the weight of his effort, but he did not fall. He walked. The lion had risen. The villagers who witnessed it never forgot. The cripple who had crawled for 17 years now stood before them, taller than most men, stronger than any had imagined. The iron rod, bent by his effort, was preserved as a relic. And Sundiata Keita, for the first time in his life, walked forward into his destiny. Learning to walk at 17 was only the beginning. Sundiata had to teach his body to run, to fight, to do everything other warriors had learned as children. He trained obsessively, pushing himself beyond exhaustion, making up for lost time with sheer determination. The legs that had failed him for 17 years now carried him everywhere, and he did not stop moving. The years of watching, of studying, of learning from the ground now paid dividends. Sundiata knew how warriors moved because he had watched them his entire life. He knew their weaknesses, their habits, their predictable patterns. Now, with a body that could finally execute what his mind had been planning, he became a warrior unlike any other. Word of the risen prince spread. The boy who could not walk was now a warrior to be feared. Kings who had ignored him began to take notice. Ambassadors came to observe. Some offered alliance. Others watched with suspicion. But no one laughed at Sundiata Keita anymore. The crawling prince was dead. The lion had awakened. While Sundiata wandered and trained, a darkness was spreading across West Africa. His name was Sumaro Kanti, king of the Saso. He was a sorcerer, they said, protected by powerful magic that made him invincible in battle. His army swept across the region, conquering kingdom after kingdom, burning villages, enslaving populations. Sumaro conquered Sundiata's homeland, the land of his fathers. He imposed brutal rule, demanded tribute, crushed anyone who resisted. The people who had once laughed at a crawling prince now faced a tyrant that made their mockery seem gentle. They remembered Sundiata. They began to whisper his name. Messengers came to Sundiata in exile. They told him of Sumaro's atrocities. They begged him to return, to lead them, to fulfill the prophecy. Sundiata listened. He remembered the mockery, the exile, the years of crawling. He also remembered that those who had mocked him were the same people now suffering. He did not owe them anything. But he owed himself everything. Sundiata did not rush to battle. He understood that Sumaro could not be defeated by a single army. He spent years building alliances, traveling from kingdom to kingdom, convincing rulers that their only hope lay in unity. The Sorcerer King had to be faced together, or he would pick them apart one by one. The king of Mima, who had sheltered Sundiata during his exile, pledged his warriors. Other kings followed. The coalition grew. Sundiata proved himself as skilled in diplomacy as he would later prove in battle. He gave speeches, made promises, built trust. The man who had been rejected by his own people was now the leader of a dozen kingdoms united against a common enemy. The army that gathered under Sundiata's command was the largest West Africa had ever seen. Warriors from a dozen kingdoms, each with their own traditions, their own tactics, their own grievances against the tyrant. Sundiata had to mold them into a single fighting force, to give them discipline, to make them believe they could defeat the invincible Sorcerer King. The lion was about to be tested. Sundiata knew he could not defeat Sumaro through strength alone. The Sorcerer King was protected by magic, by talismans that made him invulnerable to weapons. Every army that had faced him had been destroyed. Sundiata needed to find the weakness, the crack in the armor, the secret that would bring the tyrant down. The weakness came from an unexpected source, Sundiata's own sister, Nana Triban. She had been captured by Sumaro and forced to become one of his wives. In his confidence, in his arrogance, the Sorcerer King had revealed his secret. A single arrow, tipped with the spur of a white rooster, could break his magic. If it struck him, he would be mortal like any man. Armed with this knowledge, Sundiata prepared. He had special arrows made, each tipped with the spur of a white rooster. He trained his best archers to aim for Sumaro above all others. He planned the battle around one moment, one chance, one arrow that would end the terror. The Sorcerer King had no idea his doom was approaching. In 1235, the two armies met at the plains of Kirina. Sundiata commanded the coalition of a dozen kingdoms. Sumaro led his Saso warriors, confident in their invincibility, in their Sorcerer King. The battle that followed would decide the fate of West Africa for centuries. The battle was ferocious. Sumaro's warriors fought with desperate courage, believing their king could not fall. Sundiata's coalition fought for freedom, for their homes, for their children. The lines surged back and forth, neither side gaining advantage. Sundiata cut through the enemy ranks, always moving toward his target, always watching for his moment. Then Sundiata saw his chance. Sumaro, exposed for just a moment. He signaled his archers. An arrow flew, tipped with the spur of a white rooster. It struck the Sorcerer King. His magic shattered. For the first time in his life, Sumaro felt pain. For the first time, he knew fear. Sumaro fled. His army, seeing their invincible king run, broke and scattered. The coalition pursued, slaughtering the remnants of Saso power. Sumaro disappeared into the mountains, never to be seen again. His empire collapsed. And Sundiata Keita stood victorious over the ashes of tyranny. After Kirina, Sundiata was proclaimed Mansa, emperor, of all the lands he had united. The Mali Empire was born. He established his capital at Miani, a city that would become legendary for its wealth, its learning, its power. The crippled boy who had crawled in the dust now ruled the greatest empire Africa had ever seen. Sundiata did not rest after victory. He spent years building the institutions that would make Mali great. He established the Bara, a council of elders that would advise future kings. He organized the army into a professional force. He secured the gold fields that would make Mali the richest kingdom in the medieval world. He also summoned the griots, the keepers of oral tradition. He commanded them to remember his story, to preserve it for future generations, to ensure that no one would forget the boy who crawled and the lion who rose. The griots did their work well. Today, centuries later, the epic of Sundiata is still recited in villages across West Africa. Sundiata ruled for approximately 25 years after Kirina. He saw his empire grow, his people prosper, his name become legend. When he died, around 1255, he left behind a realm that would endure for centuries, that would produce kings like Mansa, that would make Africa's golden age the envy of the world. Today, the epic of Sundiata is still told. Griots across West Africa recite the story of the crippled boy who became a lion. Children hear it and learn that their circumstances do not define them. Adults hear it and remember that greatness is possible, no matter how humble the beginning. Sundiata Keita went from a crawling child in the dust to the Lion King of a continent. Because greatness was never about how you start. It is about refusing to stay down. It is about rising when everyone expects you to fall. It is about becoming the lion they never saw coming. The boy who could not walk walked into history. The prince they threw away built an empire. The lion who rose from the dust still roars, centuries later, across the savannah he freed. Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Africa. Remember his name.